One of the greatest mysteries for anyone who has read the books is an enigmatic figure that saves our hobbits not just once, but twice on their way to Rivendell. With his bright blue jacket and his yellow boots, he almost seems ludicrously out of place in the darkness of the old forest or the unholy Barrow Downs, where his red face with many laughing wrinkles and his almost playful demeanor in the face of mortal danger to the four hobbits only helps to grow the enigma that is this ancient being. To the Northmen he is Orald, to the dwarves he is Forn, and to the elves and the Dunedain he is known as Yarwain ben Adar. But to the four young hobbits he introduces himself as Tom Bombadil. So who was this ancient being who had been there before any living thing existed on Arda? And where did he ultimately come from? And most importantly, what was Tom Bombadil? Welcome, Eldanyar. I'm happy to see so many of you gather here for this long-awaited and oft-requested topic. I also hope to see even more of you next time, when we will look at another requested subject from you, the ancient strongholds of the first Dark Lord, Melkor Morgoth. So be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be reminded when the next chapter starts. But this week we answer the ancient question: what was Tom Bombadil? Every time we touch upon some ancient mystery that goes back to the ages before history itself was recorded, like when we discussed the Nameless Ones in the depths below Moria, or the origins of the ancient demon Ungoliant, the topics of discussion afterwards always, in one way or another, lead back to Tom Bombadil. Was he a hidden Vala, a result of the primordial clashes within the music of the Ainur, perhaps even Eru Ilúvatar himself? So many ideas, such intriguing ideas. They make our heads spin and our thoughts run wild with the consequences of what each theory would mean for the greater whole of creation. So let us come back, Meldonyar, and first paint the picture of what we actually know about him. Tom Bombadil was, or is, quite frankly, a little man. Too large and heavy for a hobbit, if not quite tall enough for one of the race of man. With great yellow boots on his thick legs, he had a blue coat and a long brown beard. His eyes were blue and bright, and his face was red as a ripe apple, but creased into 100 wrinkles of laughter. And on his head he wore an old battered hat, with a tall crown and a long blue feather stuck in the band. Instead of walking through the primordial forest with any degree of care, he sung loudly and carelessly, stumping around and charging through grass and rushes like a cow going down to drink. He lived on the southeastern edge of the old forest, on the bank of the river Withywindle, with his wife Goldberry, and all of this region, according to him and his wife, were his domain. Here he was the master, though Goldberry was never very clear about this, as in one breath she both called him master, as well as said that the trees and the grasses and all things growing or living in the land belong each to themselves. It is certain, however, that within his domain nothing could harm him or even hinder him, and therefore he could go around there without a care in the world. His power outside his domain, however, was unknown, for Tom never really went out there by the time our hobbits met him. The last thing we know about him is that he was old, ancient, the most ancient even, by his own account. Both his Mannish and Dwarven names, Orald and Forn, mean ancient, and the name the elves in Dunedain gave him, Iarwain ben Adar, translates to oldest and fatherless. One thing to remember though is that this was not just a vain title he gave himself, for when he hosted our 4 hobbits in his house, he told them tales from before Arda was made round, and from times when the fathers of the elves had only just awoken at Cuivienen. Tales that, even among the elves, had by then become the most ancient lore, and were known to only a handful of the most ancient and wise. But now as for what, in fact, he was. For starters, there is the division between those of Ea and those of outside Ea. Those of Ea would be the races of men, elves, dwarves, or even the Ents and the likes. And though some of these could be, by our standard, immeasurably ancient, even they recognized him as Iarwain ben Adar, and thus as indeed older than anything they knew of. And thus we must conclude that Tom is, at the very least, a kind of spiritual being, like a Maia or a Vala, or even Eru Ilúvatar himself, incarnated to enjoy his creation for himself. Yes, Meldonjar, you are not alone in this suspicion. In September 1954, Tolkien replied to a letter from Master Hastings from Oxford, who pointed out such suspicions based on Goldberry's explanation. When Frodo asked her, "Who is Tom Bombadil?" she simply said, "He is." Many of you recognized this description readily, and so did Master Hastings, who asked Tolkien if this did indeed meant that Tom Bombadil is God. However, Tolkien told him the following: "As for Tom Bombadil, I really do think you are being too serious, besides missing the point. Again, the words are used by Goldberry and Tom, not me as a commentator. Goldberry and Tom are referring to the mysteries of names. Frodo has asked not what is Tom Bombadil, but who is he? If not Eru Ilúvatar himself, then perhaps he was a product of the music of creation itself, an embodiment of good to balance out the evil that was caused by the discord of Melkor, like we mentioned previously in our lesson on Ungoliant. At first this might seem a very plausible theory, but upon further inspection we discover something. The Ainulindale, the music of creation, was made by the Ainur, the disembodied spirits that existed with Eru Ilúvatar in the spaceless, timeless void that was before creation. They, however, sang the Ainulindale based on the theme of Ilúvatar. Even the discord of Melkor hath its uttermost source in Eru, as he told Melkor afterwards in his chastisement of the recalcitrant Vala. This does not in and of itself deny that Tom was a force for good to balance out the evils of the clash between the themes, but in his letter to Master Hastings, Tolkien also denies this balancing function, which would, in its deepest essence, had to have a violent nature. Instead, Tolkien says about Tom, "He is then an allegory, or an exemplar, a particular embodiment of pure, real, natural science. The spirit that desires knowledge of other things, their history and nature, because they are other, and wholly independent of the inquiring mind. A spirit coeval with the rational mind, and entirely unconcerned with doing anything with the knowledge. Zoology and botany, not cattle breeding or agriculture." So if we must exclude these two options, there remains only one type of being from outside Ea, the incarnated Ainur, the Maiar and Valar. We know for certain that he is not one of the Valar, for their names and number are known to us, and thus remains only one possibility, that Tom Bombadil would have been a Maia, one of the lesser divine beings that were with Eru Ilúvatar in the void before creation. But what is there to support this idea? As a Maia, he would have entered Ea when it only just came into existence, before the first living beings walked the land, before the first plants sprouted from their seeds, before Melkor marred creation for the first time and cast the first shadow upon the still untarnished world. And that is what he claimed. He knew the dark under the stars when it was fearless, before the Dark Lord came from outside. What is also a familiar quality in Valar and Maiar is that, aside from being almost universally fearless, they share the unusual radiance of their presence with Tom, in whose case it is visible to our hobbits in the almost ethereal blue glow in his eyes. Finally, it is hinted at by Tolkien himself, who referred to Tom Bombadil as a spirit, a designation he almost exclusively uses for the Valar and Maiar. But, I hear some of you already ask, is he not the master and the eldest, and thus outside the hierarchy of powers? Well, we must not forget who names him as such: Goldberry his wife, and Tom himself. Most things we are told about Tom Bombadil come from them, or others who themselves knew very little about him. When discussing Tom as a potential keeper for the One Ring during the Council of Elrond, all those who spoke of him admitted that they knew very little of him, except Gandalf, who seemed to understand how his mind worked and how the One Ring had no hold on his mind. But this raises another question. If Tom Bombadil was indeed a Maia, just like Gandalf, why would it not have any hold on him, whilst it would have an influence on Gandalf, to such an extent that the wizard dared not use it? In the same letter as before, Tolkien explains that Tom Bombadil
exhibits another point in his attitude to the ring, and its failure to affect him. You must concentrate on some part, probably relatively small, of the world or universe, or whether to tell a tale, however long, or to learn anything, however fundamental. And therefore much will, from that point of view, be left out, distorted on the circumference, or seem a discordant oddity. The power of the ring overall concerned, even the wizards or emissaries, is not a delusion, but it is not the whole picture, even of the then state and content of that part of the universe.
This, in essence, means that Tom Bombadil was most definitely affected by the One Ring in some way, but Frodo and the other hobbits, from whose point of view the tale is brought to us, could not distinguish it, because to them the effect of the ring was just turning its wearer invisible. But as we all know, this is only one of the lesser abilities of the One Ring. And of course the ring did not turn Tom invisible. As a Maia, his presence would be equally in the physical world as well as the realm of shadows. And as such, the ring had nowhere to pull its wearer to. Just like when Sauron wore the One Ring on his finger and remained visible to mortal eyes, so would it have been with every other Maia, like Gandalf, Tom Bombadil, and yes, even a Balrog for that matter. The strongest power of the One Ring, as we all know, is to seduce its wearer with promises of great might, wealth and power, making even the impossible seem within the wearer's grasp. This is why Lady Galadriel would have fallen, and even Gandalf dared not touch it. However, unlike any other being in Middle-earth, this was not an issue for Tom. He does not desire power, wealth, or control over others. The ring can promise him nothing, for Tom already is living the perfect life for him. Or, as Tolkien wrote to Lady Mitchinson,
"The story is cast in terms of a good side and a bad side, beauty against ruthless ugliness, tyranny against kingship, moderated freedom with consent against compulsion that has long lost any object save mere power, and so on. But both sides, in some degree, conservative or destructive, want a measure of control. But if you have, as it were, taken a vow of poverty, renounced control, and take your delight in things for yourself without reference to yourself, watching, observing, and to some extent knowing, then the question of the right and wrongs of power and control might become utterly meaningless to you, and the means of power quite valueless."
So there is our answer to Tom Bombadil's essence and nature. No mighty spirit of good to battle the darkness, nor an inconspicuous avatar of the one above all, but one of his Maia, spending his existence in Ea in his own manner of paradise. However, in the end, there is only one certainty that we must recognize. No matter how well all the pieces of the puzzle match, in the end, Tom Bombadil remains a mystery, as Tolkien never gave a clear and unambiguous answer about him. And that is exactly how Tolkien wanted it. And if I knew him well enough, that is how Tom Bombadil would have wanted it as well. Thus we conclude this theory and this video. Did the knowledge surprise you, or do you disagree with our conclusions? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed it and would like to learn more of the inner workings of Arda, be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon to be notified of the next chapter in the Mysteries of Westerness, and learn of the ancient predecessors of the dreadful Tower of Barad-dûr, the ancient strongholds of the first Dark Lord, Melkor Morgoth, the fortresses of Angband and Utumno. But for now, I have been Irjikor Kuruvane, and I wish you all Namarje Meldonyar.